Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report, as we return to my conversation about the so-called war on drugs with director Eugene Jarecki. His film, The House I Live In, won the Grand Jury Prize for U.S. Documentary this past weekend at the Sundance Film Festival. I spoke with Eugene along with the woman who helped to raise him, one of the film's main characters, Nannie Jeter. I asked him about the cost of the drug war.
You know, we've spent, in the years of the drug war as we know it today started in 1971 when Richard Nixon called it a drug war. We had had drug laws in this country going back to the 1800s, which we go into in the film a little bit. But it was Nixon who made it a war. And when you make something a war, what comes with that are all the problems that wars bring. Profiteering, corruption, fear-mongering, victims, aggressors, an industrial sector that emerges. Just like the weapons business, what we discovered is there is a giant and sort of secret network of people in this country. It's not even that secret. It's just secret if you don't realize it's there. But there's this vast spectrum of people. You know, when you put a prison in a town, that prison needs food facilities. So somebody's got to make the food. And this isn't just about jobs. It's about companies that then service these institutions. You need laundry service. You need phone service. We went to a trade show, for example, where we saw, as if we were looking at people who were selling like plumbing hardware, people selling all the stuff you need to make a bigger, better, stronger, tougher prison.
Let's go to that trade show for just 1 minute.
This chair, in comparison to other types of restraint chairs, is the most humane, and it's not restrictive.
The war on drugs has to be a war at every level. It has to be a war on the streets of the cities. It has to be a war at the state level, and it has to be a war at the federal level. It's just like fighting the war on terrorism.
Before, in the prisons, I guess the only choice was you could get a Torah or a Bible. Things have changed now. Anybody want their free copy of the Quran?
All sorts of people start to get a vested interest, a financial interest in keeping the system going.
Well, we're in the business of supplying corrections with products. It's a growing market. Prisons, there's a lot of prisoners in the United States.
This company, CCA, we are the leader and the largest in the world as far as private prisons and jails. They're highly rated in the stock market. It hones your ability to do it less expensively because we have to earn a profit.
There's a whole range of corporations now deeply invested in the drug war and mass incarceration.
And all these people are not trying to do anything wrong. They're trying to make society better. But their actions combined together become part of the thrust that makes the bad parts of the drug war more feasible and more practical.
The thing with the war on drugs is, and the question we have to ask is, not why is it a failure, but why, given that it seems to be a failure, why is it persisting? And I'm beginning to think, maybe it's a success. What if it's a success by keeping police forces busy? What if it's a success by keeping private jails thriving? What if it's a success keeping a legal establishment justified in its self-generated activity? Maybe it's a success on different terms than the publicly stated ones.
You're watching a clip, listening to a clip of The House I Live In. The filmmaker is Eugene Jarecki. Even remarkable to see Bernard Kerik in this clip, who is the former police commissioner, as you have identified him, prisoner, because of his own corruption.
The strange thing about the war on drugs, and I think the thing I hope to get across most to people, is that the war on drugs is something that was made by this country. We've made it. It's upon us. We have, in our country, we've spent $1 trillion on the war on drugs. It's had 45 million arrests in 30 years. It has not reduced the supply, demand, use, sale, or purity or availability of drugs. So it's failed. There's no one anymore who stands by it, maybe other than Bernard Kerik. But there's almost no one I could get to tell me, yeah, this is a great idea. They all say it's a terrible idea. But how do you stop it at this point? How do you slow down something that is so immoral, so deeply misguided, but so powerful? And that's the big $64,000 question we're all trying to figure out. And by making the film, I'm hoping the public can get into that question in a more engaged way.
Talk about some of the other figures in this documentary, The House I Live In.
Of the numbers? Well,
one of the people, I just want to say, who is quite compelling on how he describes this, because he has researched it for so long, as David Simon, who did The Wire.
Sure. Well, After I spoke with Nannie initially about her own family experience of the drug war, her firsthand experience is of drugs. I mean, she's a kind person, so fundamentally, she feels pain about loved ones suffering from the most immediate thing she can see, which is drugs. But I even know from her own reporting to me about her own life over time that it's not just the drugs. It's that drugs then get made worse by our criminal justice practices, which have been proven to be racist, misguided, driven by the kind of propaganda that surrounds drugs. And so members of her family over time who had issues with drugs didn't meet the kind of, she said, you can put a man on the moon, why can't you deal with this? Well, the question is, where's the political will to deal with it? If you have a public health issue and you instead treat it as a big opportunity to build prisons and to have industrial interests benefit from that, and politicians who can get elected saying, I'm tough on crime, you end up creating a statistical mess on your hands. Where sure, we have more black men incarcerated today in one form or another than were enslaved at the end of slavery 10 years before the Civil War ended. That's a shocking statistic.
And the effects from housing.
Think about that. Think about the
voting.
If you go to jail, you come home, for the rest of your life, as Michelle Alexander says in the film, you have to sign that dreaded, you have to check that box, that dreaded question on a job application, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And that stays with you forever, and it affects everything. It affects whether you can live in public housing, whether you can get food stamps, whether you're eligible for any of the things that then help you find your life back, if you ever had a life to begin with. And so then we see that we have the highest recidivism rates of any Western nation, apart from the fact that we're the world's largest jailer and the rest. And so my mission, which started with her feelings about the people she loved, who I loved through her, became a study of why it hasn't been more morally and decently and honorably approached as a public concern.
Do you see this, Ms. Jeter, as a racist war?
Yes, I do, because when he was speaking about voting, we have an ex-governor that spent time incarcerated, and he went right back into politics. So, and yet still, and this is what I look at, those that are in high places can pull time and come right back and vote and run and get almost back in the same position they were in. That's the double standards. That is, you can do it for one, and the same people are against the little man, whilst you are doing what you have changed against someone else. And it's not fair. It's about fairness.
Eugene Jarecki, you actually go with cops to do a drug raid.
We do. And one of the wonderful things is you could get really hopeless making a movie like this. We have 2.3 million people incarcerated in America. That's 1% of our population. We are the world's biggest jailer beyond countries that are totalitarian in nature. You look at the country and you see how unfairly the laws are written. You see that crack has historically been punished 100 times as severely as powder, and that seems no accident. Whether it was an accident when it started or not, over the years, jurists and judges and doctors and experts said this is wrong, it's unfair, and it's not based on science. Crack and powder are chemically the same, so why is one being punished that way? When you see all of that and you work with people in prisons and you talk to people who are at close range of this, you could really get very despairing, because the stories of people touch your heart in a very deep way. But the reverse also happens, which is I get to talk to Nannie, and she tells me things of so much honesty and so much depth about the issues she's living through, and she's not lost any fight. She's not given up on grandchildren she even has incarcerated right now. To be perfectly fair, the grandchild she has incarcerated right now is the son of her son who died from drugs to begin with. This cycle goes on as an infecting generation. So could I lose hope? Yes, but until she says, I look over her, she hasn't lost hope. And then I talk to cops in the film who openly tell me about what they're doing, openly tell me that they don't entirely agree with what they're doing. They're taking great jeopardy to appear in my movie and speak out critically about the way that police forces, for example, run on the money they collect from people. They bust a drug operation, as you're going to see in this clip, and he'll tell you in the clip, we really run on the profits we get from these kind of operations.
We like to believe that the drug war has given law enforcement all these tools, all of this authority in which to pursue criminality and gangsterism. But actually what it did was it basically destroyed the police deterrent.
That's
in
David
a very
Simon
subtle
of The Wire.
And unintended way.
Going up to 15th Street in Dixie, he's going to have some crack for him and some oxycodone pills. Joe and I are both sergeants in major narcotics, and we don't do street-level drug deals. out while you're in handcuffs, and maybe you can help yourself out, okay? So what happened is to the second guy, he's now running on foot. Yeah, that's where we believe he might have gone in there. I guess we're going to have to write this up as a separate case. Totally unrelated to the original drug deal we did, but we stumble upon a house where a couple of big stacks of money, a good amount of marijuana. That's sometimes how things happen. You know, they're not even planned.
There are a lot of detectives who I admire for their professionalism, for their craft.
Hey, what's up? Can I help you? No, sir.
But the drug war created an environment in which none of that was rewarded.
Let's get his ID. He's just cutting through the yard.
A drug arrest does not require anything other than getting out of your radio car and jacking people up against the side of a liquor store. Probable cause? Are you kidding? The problem is that cop that made that cheap drug arrest, he's going to get paid. He's going to get the hours of overtime for taking the drugs down to ECU. He's going to get paid for processing the prisoner down at Central Booking. He's going to get paid for sitting back at his desk and writing the paperwork for a couple hours. And he's going to do that 40, 50, 60 times a month so that his base pay might end up being only half of what he's actually paid as a police officer.
Most important thing right here.
We're paying a guy for stats.
That's a clip from the house I live in. Eugene Jarecki, take it from there, this raid. And you also speak with judges.
Well, throughout the history of the war on drugs, it has gained a greater and greater number of critics on the inside. The people we spoke to who gave us the deepest criticisms of this system operate within it. Security Chief Carpenter, he is the head of security at a major prison in Oklahoma. I thought he looked like the toughest guy I'd ever met in my life. I thought he's a terrifying person to look at. I wouldn't want to be under his lock and key if you paid me. I get to sit down to talk to him, and I discover he has very deep and textured views about the wrongness of the way in which we incarcerate, and we put so many resources into handcuffs, more cops, tougher laws. And where do those resources come from? They come out of the very programs in a prison that would help somebody not become a repeat offender, help them gain a skill, build some life elements that they will need when they get out so that they don't go the way of Nannie's son, who was in and out of prison and not getting that kind of care.
In house I live in Oklahoma, you talk about the draconian laws there, and a guy caught on possession of meth 3 times, his sentence?
Well, there's a guy in the film named Kevin Ott, and Kevin Ott is in for life without parole for a nonviolent drug crime. And he has no violent drug crimes in his history. He has 3 in a row possession. So he got a 3 strikes, and you're in for life without parole. Life without parole for possession. Yeah.
You have people like Bill Clinton, the president, saying 3 strikes and you're out, and we're proud of that.
Yeah, and they're doing it, and it's I think when Americans see that, and without working only along racist lines, I would say when Americans see a relatively middle-class white American like Kevin Ott in there, they go, wow, this isn't just happening to other people, it's happening to a guy who kind of looks like my uncle. Now, I don't think that's how people should think. I think they should care already when it's happening to another person. But for some reason in this society, a lot of times you have to wake people up by their neighbor or their brother or their uncle.
Very quickly, the solution.
What's my view of the solution? The first thing is that you need to have a very changed dialogue in this country that understands drugs as a public health concern and not a criminal justice concern. And that means the system has to say, we were wrong.
And do you think we're going to have that in this election year when sound bites are 9 seconds and the drug war and the victims of it, the perpetrators, et cetera?
I mean, I'm not a dreamer on that score, but I do believe there is so much wrong with this. It is showing its weaknesses so terribly, and other countries are shaming us, like Portugal, where they've made drugs legal and it's working and things like this. I believe that making drug activity that is nonviolent in nature illegal was a grave mistake in this country. If you want to say that violent activity is the province of the law and we should protect ourselves one from the other, from rape, robbery, murder, the classic things that we use police for and that we use laws for, I perfectly agree with that. I think Nannie would, anyone would. And if you take a drug and it makes it worse, it's no different than if you got in a car and you hurt someone with your car, it might be manslaughter. If you were drinking, they're going to call it murder. It's going to enhance. It should. Drugs should be seen in that way. But alcohol, which is more dangerous than all of them, has laws applied to it that that basically say it's illegal to do unless it's an enhancer on you driving. Well, let's make drugs that. So in other words, I would say, let's stop talking about legalization versus the most draconian system in the history of the world. Let's talk about no more having it be illegal to engage in nonviolent drug activity. I think millions of Americans who use drugs anyway, and we all know that everybody uses drugs in this country. We are the biggest drug-using country in the world. Everyone will cheer for that because they're still protected one from the other, but we're not doing something that is so deeply on the wrong side of history. It's obvious.
Ms. Jeter, since Eugene calls you his second mother, you helped raise Eugene. How do you feel he turned out?
Well,
to be honest.
Well, my children call him my son. When the phone rang, they said that's her other son. and he is like my son. This family I love is three of them, and the oldest one called me and almost wept. I never met a family like this, and I knew Eugene before he was born. Matter of fact, I was his supposed to be nurse, because his mom was tired of nurses. Something had happened. So I was in their home when Eugene came home, when his parents brought him home from the hospital. And I have loved him ever since. And I talked about him, and I didn't know my sons were jealous of him, because when I would come home, all I would talk about was Eugene, and Tommy and Andrew.
That's a complicated part of the history, you know, and it's something we deal with in the film, because for somebody like me and Nannie, we're just in a system where she's looking for work, she's got a job with a family. My family left Connecticut. She traveled with us. That left her son, who got into drugs and other things, unguarded to some extent by her. She feels a weight in her about that. I feel that neither of us is to blame for that. It's a system. It's an economy in this country that has lots of people driving long distances to work today on even more expensive gas than ever before. Like, it's a tough time, and it has been for a long time. And she and I, within that, just have a real love for one another. But I think we're both kind of aware of the complicated political dynamics of who we are. I learned a lot of that from her, because she would say to me things like that, and I don't know, am I supposed to feel guilty about that, or how am I supposed to feel? And I didn't do anything wrong. I just love her, and she really loves me. But for example, when I meet her kids, I'm aware that time spent toward me is time not spent toward them when I was a kid. That matters. You can't take that for granted. It doesn't have to. It's not about blame, but it's just a fact that needs to be understood if we're going to make the world better and have it not be that way.
Director Eugene Jarecki, along with Nannie Jeter, the woman who helped raise him. She's one of the film's main characters. Jarecki's film, The House I Live In, won the Grand Jury Prize for U.S. Documentary this past weekend at the Sundance Film Festival. We spoke in Park City, Utah, at the Sundance headquarters. And that does it for today.